Excellent. Thanks for pointing that out. So many nuts and bolts to be keeping track of while we're doing this. So I'm going to move on from this slide, but again, that assessment link is just in your chat. So you're welcome to do that at any point in time while I'm doing this overview. This should be relatively quick. I'm assuming that the vast majority of you are relatively familiar with the best practice standards. Maybe you haven't taken the time to read all of it, as they say, or on the internet, the young people say TLDR. It's too long. I didn't read it. It is dense. It is a huge document. And my advice to you is if you haven't gotten through it, that's okay. Just pick one, right? Go through them in order. Best practice one is the place to start. They are meant to be done in order. The best practice one is probably the largest of them. It's also the one we're focusing on most today. But we will be giving you just a general overview of each of them. I'm going to go through some of just essentially the basics of how we might use this document. But first, I just want to make sure you know who I am. So I'm Megan Fitzgerald. I am the training coordinator for the Family and Youth Justice Programs at AOC. And I am happy to help you with any training needs that you might have. Move through this. So our learning goals just for this section are just to develop a general familiarity with the best practice guide. I will introduce a few tools that you might be able to use to help you with implementation of your best practice standards. And then also there's that assessment. So I want to get an idea of your level of understanding of that guide as a baseline for future work that I'm going to be doing with you over the next couple of years on this grant. So pretty basic standards. The biggest one of all, to be honest, above all of the learning goals about best practices is really to develop relationships between the courts. I think there's a real need for that. And I think that this is a great way to get it started by talking about something that's important to all of us. I also wanted to mention that this best practice manual is extensive, it's detailed, it may take a significant amount of time to get through. And also that I'm a firm believer of practicing what we preach. I can't think of any area where this is more true, more accurate than in family treatment court. As Molly demonstrated, we have a lot of people that are going through a lot while we're seeing them in court. That leads to a lot of stress on our parts because we care so much. And that means that perhaps we could consider, while we're in a training for a full day, whether we're in court for a full day, that we could practice some of our mindfulness tools as well. Consider that, like our FTC participants during court may need breaks, you might need breaks too. You may need fidget tools. You may need consideration of your physical location. Maybe you need to stand for a little bit. All of those things are helpful to you to be mindful in court. And they're also really helpful in a meeting like this. It's not only good advice, it's backed by research. So this is a article that came out in 2020 about mindfulness-based interventions. It looked at some of the different parts of those mindfulness-based interventions, what they increase, and how they can lead to behavior change. It's a really interesting article. There is a link in the slides if you download them, and I'll also make sure there's a link on the website. You also can just look up Schumann Oliver et al. It's a Harvard Review article. But essentially what we're thinking about today is this lower section of this graph where we have attention and cognitive control. When we're doing mindfulness-based activities, we're thinking about our present place and time, then we're better able to pay attention, which also means we're better able to learn. The science proves that, the science shows that, our participants show that. And so that's something that just you should be thinking about while you're going through this as well. One of my goals for training is to do the thing, to teach the thing. So I remind myself often that self-care is not a self-indulgence. It is self-preservation. As someone who has gone through significant trauma in my past and has to work on this on a daily basis, remembering that self-care is something that I just want to guide you all to do as you're building your team, as you're thinking about bringing your team together, as you're thinking about those collaborations. Everything is better when we're really centering ourselves. We're good and healthy in a good place as we move forward in our work. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that mindfulness is an evidence-based trauma-informed practice, which is a part of Best Practice 1, Provision H. You can read more about that on page 21 of your manual. This afternoon, we're going to learn more about trauma-informed court practices. Laura Vogel will be talking about this. She has a great presentation with one of her FTC graduates. So we'll see a really, really excellent presentation then if you're able to join us. I won't push on this much more because you're going to get it in the afternoon. But I just want to point out that showing participants that we do this, that we stand up and stretch every once in a while, that we take a break somewhere outside if possible, that we take a few deep breaths when we're thinking really hard about something and feeling that emotion. That's a great way to teach other people to do that and to normalize it so that they know this is just something that we do. This is part of our daily practice. And it also really helps to slow down an overactive nervous system that may be experiencing some of those traumatic effects of having a court system that wasn't always the most supportive place for people. So highly recommend just thinking about that as you're moving forward. A couple other things you want to have available to you: FTC practice or best practices standards PDF or a printed booklet if you're lucky enough to have one of those available for download on our website. We also have it available, or you also can find it on NEDCP's website and CFF websites. It's everywhere. And then also you may want to have some materials from your court available during our breakout rooms, depending on what your breakout room talks about. There's lots of different options, and I really want those conversations to be guided by you. Having your policy and procedure manual just available, any MOU documents, participants manual, advertising materials, anything that you have might be useful for that. So do have that around if you're able to gather those during a break, or if you already have them available, you're way on top of things. Already mentioned, we have downloadable booklets available. There is at the very beginning of that document a section that's just called the executive summary that has a really short version, little summary of each of those. It also includes an extensive list of the writers and reviewers and all of the people that put that document together. It's a very well vetted evidence-based document, which I'll talk about in just a minute what that means. There's also in the later sections of the document provisions for each standard, goes into the rationale and key considerations for each of them so that you have an idea of sort of why you should be doing it and also what you should be thinking about as you try to implement those best practice standards. Or as you're looking through each of those individual best practice standards, and we're talking about them being evidence-based, Kelly mentioned that my background is spider biology. That's accurate. I do have a PhD in spider biology. It's a long story how I got from there to here. But one of the things that we learn in a PhD program of any kind is how to really nail down what the evidence is for something. If you're going to write about something, then you need to know that the sources that you're putting down are accurate. You need to know that there's value in them and that you're going to be sharing them. So we're going to just go through really quick, like my process. If I'm going to write an article, what I look at for some of those citations and how I sort of figure out, is this valuable? Is this a study that I'm going to use? What sort of information do I want to gain from there? So this is just at random. I picked one of the citations that is in that booklet. It's for provision or for best practice standard 1. I believe it's the 11th citation down. And it's just an article on the effects of multidisciplinary family treatment drug courts on child and family outcomes. It's a quasi-experimental study, which means it's semi-experimental. They do that whenever there's a time that it would be dangerous to the health of people to make it really experimental. A really easy example is if you think about cigarette smoking. You can't force people to smoke cigarettes to test if they're good or bad. That would be a terrible idea. So you might do a quasi-experimental study where you have two different groups, people who already smoked, people who didn't already smoke, and you try to predict what will happen to their health outcomes based on those groups that they're in. So they call it quasi-experimental because we're not really picking the people at random. The same thing is what they're doing in this study. So the first thing I do when I find a study, like, oh, that looks really interesting, I might read a little bit about it. And then I look immediately at those authors. And I'm like, oh, okay, Bronze, I've never heard of this guy. Let's see who he is. I pull up his CV on UW's site. I'm like, whoa, This gentleman has read and written a lot of articles. He seems like they're well respected in his field. I know all of these citations. I know some of the people he's worked with. So I'm going to say he's probably got a fairly good career. He works with a well-known portion of UW. And, I think that probably his background says that he's probably got a good understanding of that. I don't want to leave it there. So I also look at Pullman. I'm like, MD Pullman, don't know him either. Well, it turns out he also has an enormous number of citations. He seems really on top of things as well. So probably he also seems to know what's going on. One of the things that I look at here is on the side. This is a screenshot of Google Scholar. All of these are the things that he's written. Over here are the times when other people have cited the papers that he's written. So he's had 2,200 people that have cited his works over the course of his career. That's really good. That's decent. For reference, I'm going to just quick show you my Google Scholar. I'm also a PhD. I know a lot about spiders, not so much about other things. I have 39 citations, and I was pretty proud of that until I looked at that 2,285. So really, really people that know a lot about what they're doing. They know a lot about child welfare, and they're doing good work in trying to figure out what those outcomes might be in family treatment court. Next thing I might look at is a journal. So what is this journal? Where does it come from? How valuable is the information in the journal? This is the Journal of Child Maltreatment. So I go to their website. I find, okay, they're they're part of a publishing group called Sage Publishing. I know that group. They do a lot of biology studies, biology journals as well. Up here in the corner, in the top of your corner, you can see that there's this impact factor. Anything above 3 is pretty good. Anything above 4 is very good. 5, when you're looking at an average impact factor, is perfect. So 4.8 is very, very good. So I have good reason to expect that this journal, Child Maltreatment, is a pretty decent source of information on child welfare and child maltreatment. So looking at all of those things together, I can say, I'm pretty sure that this is a good study. If I read this and I get information from it, I'm going to use this to write the article that I'm writing. Well, if you think about that one citation, this is a part of the best practice standards, but only best practice standard 1. And best practice standard also has a total of 4 different reference pages associated with it. This is only one that highlighted in yellow section, one article that they read in order to get that information. Does this mean that they are perfect? Absolutely not. Does it mean there could be mistakes in it? Absolutely. But it does mean that they've done their work. They've done their homework. They're relying on the experts that know how to do this and are working really hard to make sure that they understand the information really well. So again, this is not something I expect you to do. This would be enormous amounts of reading. But what I can do based on that background research is I know that I can rely on my sources. I know that the people who have done this have done their work, and that I trust them to continue to tell me about what might be the best practice standards for the future. I might also use this if there's something like I'm looking for a specific way to do a little experiment in my court. I might look through the reference section there. So hopefully that was somewhat interesting to you. I know that many of you already knew all of this, but some of us in the audience are not researchers and maybe don't know about all of the background that goes into this. So then I have the real stuff here. These are the real tools that you could use. One of them is that our wonderful admin Gia and Julie Lowry worked with me and my neurotic nitpicking and put together a 1-page FTC best practice standards cheat sheet. So this does not have all of the information that's in those best practices, obviously not, but it's made to be something that you could print as a poster. We may even print it for you as a poster. You could put just a 1-page, if you have really tiny reading glasses, you could put a 1-page thing on your desk so that you could just remember the basics of each of those best practices. And that'll help guide you to which section of the book that you need to go to. Of course, you can use the table of contents and you can use those first few executive summary pages, but we also wanted you to have something that was even easier to carry with you and to find the information that you need. There's also a number of different resources and tools on the CFF website and NADCP's website. I've linked a couple of them in these slides. They're also going to be on our website, so you can get through them that way. Again, downloading the slides is the easiest way to get to them, but there's plenty of other ways you can get that information. There's a planning court guide. There's a really interesting sort of guide on how to transition from a more drug court approach to a family-centered approach. So I highly recommend those as well. And then, as we mentioned already, we're working on many, many, many different team learning opportunities. The idea of cross-training between your teams and amongst the state is so, so critical. I'm a huge believer of sharing your information, knowing who has the expertise, and working on developing those shared partners. So online modules are working on those. The intro and best practice 2 are already up today. Best practice 1 will be up by the end of the month. It needs a little bit more production. And those are separate from what we're going to be working on today. They really go through it more as a presentation. So if you're hoping to get more of that, like someone just walks you through it, that's the place to go. I think the best practice 2 video is around 16 minutes. So it's pretty easy to get through and watch. They have a little assessment at the end, so you might be able to get some credits for that or a certificate of completion, depending on what your role is on an FTC. And then all of the other things that we've mentioned, the listservs, community of practice, et cetera. And then, of course, this is a drawing that I drew myself. This is not our official logo, in case you were wondering, but I'm very proud of it because this is probably the best drawing I've ever done. That tells you about my artistic talent, right? But with our team at Family and Youth Justice Programs is always willing to talk you through things, to answer your emails and questions, to lead you to another court that might have the expertise that you're looking for. And we're just really happy to help work on reuniting families and helping folks to get through this dependency system in just an easier and more straightforward way.